All right. Oh, I see it recording. All right. Okay, this is it's awkward because I can't see me, but I can see you in the corner. So let me do this. Take you out of gallery and oh, there you are. Cool. All right, we're gonna go live in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon and welcome to the latest episode of Conversations for FilmGordon.com. I'm live with a man who I have not interviewed, since Panther. So it's been 1996. Wow. It's been a while for Mario Van Peebles, man, that I've talked to you, but this brother has always been working, man. How are you, sir? And thank you for taking the time this afternoon.
Brother, I'm good. I remember when my first film that I did with Eastwood, he said, no one gets to be flavor of the month for 30 years. And it's true, you don't. You have ups and downs. You suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and misfortune like everybody else. But if you get to stick around 30 years or so, you're doing something right. And I looked up the other day and we were having the anniversary of New Jack City, and we were all on the radio together and talking with Alan Payne, and then I later ran into Chris Rock and Ice-T and all that, and about what that was like. So it's been 30 years since I've been directing, and longer than that since I've been acting, and then not only mention that I've sort of through osmosis seen it through my dad's perspective. 50-year anniversary since he broke in with 3 Day Pass and Watermelon Man, and of course Sweet Sweetback's Bad. And in fact, Sweetback, if you look at Sweetback, is out in 1971, and then my film New Jack City comes out in 1991. So 20 years later, I got to do my first feature. So it's been dope, man. I'm good. I get 3 loves in life, right? Career-wise, love what you do, which I do. Love and enjoy the folks you get to do it with, which often I do, and more so now than ever. And love what you bring to the world with it. Love what your work says. If you can, entertain folks, but maybe make them think a little bit, then that's a challenge I'm willing to take on. I love it.
Well, I was going to tell you, Mario, in all the times that I've ever talked to you, it's always been really smooth and kind. And I actually forgot one. There was a film you did with your son that we had a conversation around that years ago as well. But I was going to tell you, you come from really good stock, man. And I was doing some research. I mean, I'm very well aware of your dad's career. And it kind of hit me because you were just talking about the 71-91 connection. With probably like since race films, man, there's a huge gap between that period of race films and then when your father emerges in the late 1960s. And then we have this era, whether you want to call it the blaxploitation era or whatever you want to call it. And then there's this lull before Spike Lee comes along and reinvigorates everything in 86. But people forget your father's contribution, which is absolutely huge. And this was really a film that I had never had an opportunity to see. I knew it existed. I had watched Watermelon Man. I saw Sweetback. But this film kind of hit me in my soul, man, this character and this portrayal of Turner. And this whole situation, man, with the situation with the mirror where it's this conscious talking to him throughout the film. Now, did you have a chance to ever talk to your dad about, now we understand the genesis is he was over in Paris and he kind of created the story, but did he really break down to you kind of the elements of what it took to put this film together and the mindset he was in when he created it?
Okay, so let me go to that because there's layers on that, man. First of all, my dad was in the Air Force. I don't know if you know that. And he had broken the cardinal rule, which was don't become too good at a job you don't want to keep. And he'd become their best bomber, navigator for bombing. And so they used to fly Globetrotter missions after Pearl Harbor, they wouldn't have a threat constantly in the air. And so my dad was the navigator, and they would have competitions where they would drop a dummy bomb down at a target, and he kept winning. And so they didn't want to let him go. And when he got the chance to get out of there, he wanted to get out of there. And so my mother came to visit him, and she showed up. And you're not supposed to have, people on the base, women on the base you're not related to, married to, whatever. And they pretended to be cousins. My mom is blonde hair and blue eyes. And so they pretended to be cousins, which was an okay ruse until I started to come into the picture. So I am the product of a dynamic that probably inspired a 3-day pass. My parents then got across the border to Mexico, where they had me, and that's how I got. How many brothers do you know named Mario, right? So that's how I got the name Mario. So that was it. When I saw the movie, I was like, wow, this is a lot of stuff. Sort of. My parents were together for years, so it wasn't a short romance, but it was interesting to see that he was drawing on things that I knew from our experience as a family. But the other thing is, when you look at 3-day pass, is that think about where it is contextually, time-wise. That if Black folks at this point in the late 50s, early 60s, are referring to themselves as colored. Well, what does colored mean? Well, right now, if I look at you, your shirt, I would say maybe your shirt is white, maybe even your wall, and the portrait behind you might be a little bit colored. So the inference of colored is just slightly different than white. So subtextually, what does that mean? It means recognize our humanity. We're not different than you. We're human. You're white. We're colored. Give us a slice of the American pie. Let us sit at the lunch counter with you at Woolworths. Let us go to some of these same schools. Let us vote. Come on, man. We're just colored. And of course, Brother Malcolm says, yo, man, power concedes nothing without demand. I love Dr. King, but he's speaking nonviolence to an enemy that just don't speak nonviolence. So, if you're thinking you're going to be Gandhi, remember this: the Indians were in a majority, and the British occupiers were a minority. So that's a big ass brown elephant sitting on a little white elephant. They're not recognizing your humanity after 300, 400 years. They just getting better at whooping your ass. You know what I mean?
What?
So Malcolm says, let's have freedom by any means necessary. And Dr. King says, no, let's have freedom by peaceful means. And when they both get killed, and some Kennedys too, all them colored people go, fuck that. We are Black. Fuck it. Fuck trying to be colored. So now the subtext of Black is, it is as different from white as it can be. We're not going to straighten our hair anymore. We're going to have our afros. We're going to have the Black Panther Party for self-defense. We're saying Black is beautiful. We're not saying white is not beautiful. Right. We're saying Black is beautiful. Like we say Black Lives Matter. It doesn't mean that's at the expense of yellow lives or brown lives or blue lives. We're just saying Black Lives Matter too, man. So now you have the Black Power movement. Well, what's interesting is and I hope I'm not boring you, man. I'm just going to give you
No, go ahead.
So when we were colored, what did that look like reflected on screen? Well, it looked like we're putting our brightest and our best forward, the most beautiful, the sharpest, the most that we could be. We were the Poitiers, we're the Harry Belafonte, we're Diane Carroll. Just if you see that, you got to let us in, man. Come on, how can you not let us in with that? Well, at the same time, Melvin makes a 3-day pass in France. And they're not extraordinary people. The brother's just a brother. He ain't a super Negro. So the lead cat in 3-day pass, the brother, and she's just an ordinary white French girl. Do you know what I mean? And so he's making a movie about two regular people that don't really have their act together, who it's almost like a coming of age story. And he understands the psychology of both. He clearly gets the joke of humanity. He looks at her and goes, okay, her fantasy about him is she's running through the jungle. And he's this big African buck chasing her, right? And his fantasy about her is that he's on some Bridgerton shit. He's got big sleeves and he's like coming home on some Bridgerton stuff. So it's not just from the perspective of the Black guy only and not understand, and the white folks are this sort of evil other, right? It's saying, no, man, she's on her thing, he's on his thing. We're all imperfect. We're flawed. You know what I mean? So there's a different sensibility about his thing, because he doesn't really, even though there's always going to be isms, as he said. There's going to be a lookism, racism, sexism, classism. Never let the isms make you bitter, or you as an artist have lost. You know, don't let that ruin where your heart is, because good allies come in all colors, man. So he makes 3-Day Pass, which has a bounce and a kick, and it's like a bittersweet love story. It's almost like a coming of age film. It feels like, in a weird way. At a time when, you know, we're trying to prove something to white folks about being colored. That, you know, so he just makes it feel good. Yeah, we're regular people too. You know, I'm just a regular dude. She's a regular chick. You know what I mean? We ain't super this or super that. Right. And if you look at it, if you look at films like around the same time, maybe Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
And that's what I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you about that, because
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Yeah.
The text is that there's an equivalency between being Portier, who's tall and well-spoken, and a doctor of upstanding, a pillar of the community, and this little lovely white girl who's a shopkeeper. But there's an equivalency because she's white. You know what I mean? Melvin doesn't even do anything. He's like, she's white, he's this. They just get, you know, they're just human beings, man. And I think that's interesting. And the other thing is that Melvin would always cop to his various Melvins, right? And he would say, man, I got about 5 or 6 Melvins. I got radical, brave Melvin. I got wimp ass, lazy ass Melvin. I got revolutionary Melvin. I got business Melvin. I got a Melvin. There's all these different Melvins. And it allowed us as his kids to not otherize him, but to go, oh, okay, yeah, you know what? I do have lazy ass Mario. I do have punk ass Mario, but I do have badass Mario too. And so once you acknowledge that, you go, oh, and I remember once we were going to, Melvin starting to run and trying to get in shape, because he said, I've been worried about being a filmmaker, not worried about keeping my body together, and I need to run. So he started running a mile here or there. My sister and I would go see him. And one time he said, okay, I'm finally going to run a marathon. Let's have a big brunch. We went to the brunch, fancy restaurant. He got up from the table. We didn't pay attention. He didn't come back. We're like, where'd he go? We heard some whimpering. And we looked under the table, and my father was curled up under the table in the fetal position. We're like, Dad, what are you doing down there? And he said, I'm scared. but that he was okay with showing his daughter and his son, you know, punk ass Melvin, you know what I mean? Human Melvin. And he was okay with showing that in cinema too.
All right.
And I think that's part of what I found when I rewatched it. I was like, oh wow, these are some ordinary folks at a time when we were making movies where we had to be extra, all that and more. And he didn't feel compelled to do that. He just felt, oh man, I'm making a movie about some regular folks. I'm making it in French. And, you know, and to some degree, he is a super Negro. I mean, this is a brother from Chicago, picked up with his wife, his kids, went to France, taught himself French, became a journalist in French, then writes in French, a couple books, and does a movie. I mean, that's some extras. That's a super badass. Comes back with the French, you know, as the film gets the French choice for the San Francisco Film Festival, and 3-Day Pass, the story of the 3-Day Pass wins the festival, and they had no idea that Melvin was not French. They thought maybe he was Dutch, but with a name like Monsieur Melvin Van Peebles, who would know? And so he shows up at the airport. He loves to tell that story. And he rolls up on a little lady with blue hair, and she's standing there with a sign that says, Monsieur Melvin Van Peebles, Délégation Française. And he comes up and goes, yeah, baby, that's me. That's me. She's the annoying brother coming up with a black leather coat. She goes, please, I'm waiting for someone, okay? Monsieur Melvin Van Peebles, Délégation Française. He goes, well, c'est moi, c'est Melvin Van Peebles. She's like, oh, shit. You know, like the scene in Blazing Saddles, you know, with the sheriff is like, you know.
Wow.
So he had fun wowing people and knocking them out and zigging when you thought he was going to zag. But he also had the ability to laugh itself. And that's a dope thing. When you see the cat in the mirror in 3-Day Pass talking to himself about how he's going to do this and that, that's some shit Melvin would do. That's some shit I would do. Do you know what I mean? And I even use that construct in my film Badass, where I play him,
Right.
Where his other sort of, we'll always have that self-doubt version of ourselves who goes, man, you can't do that. How can you be a journalist? How can you be a director? You can, what makes you think you can do blah, 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 blah. And so, I played with that notion of these other Melvins in Badass that I saw. So even the whole thing of him going into the mirror, I played with that in my film Badass. So there's influences that I took, and other filmmakers too, like Spike uses a move that I assume was inspired by
Dolly.
Yeah, where he dollies through, and you'll see a lot of that. And but it's a bittersweet flick. It's 3 Day Pass, there's joy in it, and it's fun to see that from from Melvin's perspective at this point in time. And it's way, way ahead of its time. And that we're finally getting to the point where maybe it's okay again to just see ourselves as human, man.
Wow. Big time. But Mario, so let me ask you a question, man, because you said a couple of things. Wanted to ask you, because when I wrote my review and watching it last week, you talked about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which came out a year before this film did. I said, despite the fact that the relationships were, you look at, the interracial relationships, there was a freedom that existed in Story of a 3 Day Pass that you didn't feel in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, because he had so much stuff on his shoulders. You're dealing with your dad, you're dealing with the family, you're dealing with all these different perspectives from Isabel Sanford, the maid who's coming down on you. In the film with Melvin, you have this romance where they're just trying to be two people who kind of dig one another. They ain't about, they have their ideas, as you said, in the fantasy scenes, which are really funny, about what his perception is, what her perception is, but it's everybody else trying to bring stuff to them, and they're in this little bubble. And I said, I love the fact that there was this freedom there, and the fact that this is his first movie, and he makes this kind of French wave, avant-garde sort of a piece that has all this extra stuff in it. I thought it was mad cool that he was able to do this. He taught himself, I'm assuming, as you're telling me now, if he taught himself French, he taught himself how to be a filmmaker as well.
Yes, he was. And he said to me that we're talking about it. We're not really afraid of the dark. We're afraid of what we can't see in the dark. Right? So we're afraid of the unknown. Well, Melvin got so comfortable with always going into the unknown that kind of was his friend. Wow. So he would go learn some new stuff, go learn a new language. Well, go learn new this, go learn a new that. And he kept stretching, the boundaries of what was comfortable for him. Go to Wall Street and learn that. If go start running marathons, man, what are you doing at 50? You know what I mean? So he was that cat. He was always doing that, and he would learn from other people. I like to think that that he wasn't just a nerd for books. He was a nerd for people. Yeah. Wow. And that was something that I definitely got, that I, when I went to Hollywood, the people that really helped break my career were, one was a tall white Republican guy named Clint Eastwood, and another was a Republican guy named Stephen Cannell. And neither of them voted like me or looked like me, but good allies don't always look like you. Don't leave love on the table. If you want to be a Machiavellian, don't leave money on the table. And he understood that. He was like, man, his friend group is so diverse, and that has allowed him to source it as a partial muse for his creative input, to see the world and go, oh, okay, if we're all brown and we're in India, because we're global tribalists, we'll fight over I'm Hindu, you're Muslim. Mm-hmm. And if we're all black in Africa, we'll be I'm from Nigeria and you're from, this other spot. You know what I mean? So we're not really wired to be in big groups. We're wired to be in a group that where we can know everyone's name. and you can't know thousands of people's names, you know. So we're not wired for that. So once you understand that, say, oh, okay. So it's I still have to deal with all the lookism, sexism, racism, classism, but I can understand that we're not just the target of it, and that we're just not wired that way. We're wired to sit around the campfire and tell stories and be the griots and the keeper of the oral tradition, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, if we're all brothers, we'll find a way that I'm Crip, you're blood. Well, you know, we'll
We all
figure out a
black.
way to get it. Yeah, well, you know, I'm British, you're Irish, so we'll find some differentiation. And Dr. King says we either learn to live together as brothers and sisters or perish together and as fools. And I add to that, now we have to learn to live together as brothers and sisters in harmony with each other, but also in harmony with nature, man. Because it's not, tomorrow is going to be not just gender or racial diversity. We're going to get down to an issue where it's just biodiversity, you know, where that's also needed. So it's important to see films that expand your vocabulary as a human being.
Well, I just want to take it back to the beginning, man, because, you know, I understand that you are a Van Peebles. That is your father, and he means more to you than he means to us, but we appreciate him. And I want people to understand that before, you know, we love on, people love on Spike Lee, and I know Spike, and Spike is a good brother, right? You go back in history, and it was funny because we had a conversation about your father. Warrington Hudlin and I are really good friends, and we were talking about with our awards coming up, we wanted to honor your father. And he basically was like, well, no, I don't think that's the move. But he really had an issue when we tried to bring up the fact that we had an award called the Oscar Michaud that we wanted to honor Melvin Van Peebles with, and he wanted to fight me because he said he was, you know, that these two filmmakers are not the same. And we went back and forth, but I say all that to say that the fact that your father was among the big three when the studios were looking for African Americans or Black folks to kind of put in the director's chair in the late 60s, early 70s. You had Gordon Parks, you had Ozzie Davis, you had Melvin Van Peebles, Watermelon Man, Learning Tree, Cotton Comes to Harlem. The fact that Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song literally saved MGM from bankruptcy, you know, a film that made $15 million at the box office. His contribution is significant. And I'm not just telling you this as the son, but as a fellow filmmaker and a historian who understands this. Why do you feel that people don't see your father's contribution in cinema much in the same way as they see a lot of the younger mavericks or the younger filmmakers or the younger revolutionaries with cameras as they see them today?
I think part of it is, and Malcolm said something interesting when this journalist was asking him about Dr. King winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And he says, you know, if you're playing football and you're playing against the opposing team, and the opposing team wants to give your quarterback an award, you got to ask yourself, what are you doing wrong? You can't wait for the dominant culture to define who's successful, who's not, who should be recognized, who shouldn't. And there's a tendency for us to want to look in the mirror on that, or not look in the mirror, but look to others, to outsource our sense of importance to how much did the film make, who recognized us, who's this and who's that. And I think part of it is, and that's part of why I wanted to do Badass, was to remind us, because if we don't know where we've been, it's hard to know where we're going, of the value of our own history, that it's our story, not his story or his story. So I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is that as a people, we have been, my grandfather and I talked about this, but as a people, sometimes I think we have been so on the forward move that we don't always examine or value what we've done. So we'll create jazz, and then we're not the keepers of that flame anymore. Someone else would go, oh, you know, Charlie Parker, then you'd be all white folks at a jazz concert. Do you know what I mean? Or not all, but quite a few. And that's
majority.
Cool. But it's something to look at. We'll invent this, and you know, and then hip hop aficionados don't look like us. You know, so it's sort of something that we tend to do, whereas we're so. And my grandfather's theory on it was that it gave us a sense of movement. That if you in your life, if you weren't achieving something that made your socioeconomic standing different in the world, or maybe even that was diminishing, you could at least go, well, back in the day they listened to this song and now we listen to that song. So it gave you a sense of an artificial sense of forward movement. It's like a squirrel being on a little loop. I've ran all this way, but you didn't go that far, did you? Do you know what I mean? So that rapid culture change. You know, that old rapper, he's old now. We're listening to so-and-so. We have the latest and the greatest, and I got the new phone and the new flip and the new iPhone. I'm Instagramming myself over here, and I'm doing with a girl in the champagne. It gives you the illusion of forward, forward movement. Do you know what I mean? But when you really stop and go, do you own your home? Did you finish college? Are you doing what you want with your life? Bigger questions like that. So, you know what I mean? So so there's a tendency for us to, no, man, but we ahead. We slow down for a second. You know, what did you achieve? You know what I'm saying? So I think as a people, we tend to make a history and then allow someone else to record it and value it. And, you know, just like we outsource, you know, big decisions, we're not used to having a jury of our peers. And I think we too often acquiesce to that. We go, okay, we don't have a jury of our peers. So, you know, we're not going to decide what happens to George Floyd. That's up to them. We're not going to decide what happens to so-and-so. We're not going to decide who amongst us is great. We don't, you know what I mean? So we value the Oscars more than the Image Awards, you know what I mean? But the Image Awards, you got to be careful. While we're rewarding capitalism, or we rewarding greatness and image and integrity. And so to some degree, I think that that's because it was something my dad had said, the true Americans, and that if the Chinese come from China, the French come from France, the Germans come from Germany, but there's no place called Negro, right? So when they've taken your language and taken your last name and taken your music and don't let you have the drum, it doesn't mean they killed the flavor of the soul. It goes into other things, of course, that the rhythm from the drum goes into the bass and becomes the basis for rock and roll and soul and gospel and all that. But when you no longer know your language, how many languages do you speak?
One.
There you go. Okay, I speak a couple. Right. But when I went to Dakar and I was with the brother driving me in the cab, he goes, brother, where are you from? I'm from. So I was like, no. What languages do you speak? I said, I speak English, some French, and some Spanish. He looks at me and goes, you only speak the colonizer's tongue? Wow. You have no idea what your language was or who you was? And you go, wow, if you're Chinese, you speak Mandarin or Cantonese. If you're German, you speak this, you know, from Hamburg or you're from so-and-so, you feel me? Mm-hmm. So there's a tendency to go, oh, well, we don't know. So we just adopt the immediacy of American culture. But if you're American and you're, you know, from Lithuania and you understand that, you adopt the American stuff, but you still understand your Lithuanian roots. Right, but we just take whatever the dominant culture tells us. So we're just nodding our head to the new beat and doing the new thing and moving along, you know. And I think that's, you know, it's like before you know it, they'll do a movie and Vanilla Ice invented rap, and Benny Goodman invented jazz, and heavyweight champs look like Sylvester Stallone. And wait, hold up. Look, it happened already, man. When I did my Western, I did Posse. They wanted me to do another New Jack City. I said, no, I want to do a movie. I want to do a Western. They said, what do you do a Western? I said, yeah, man, first 44 settlers of Los Angeles, 26 were African American. They called the white dudes Rough Riders. They called the brothers boys. So when you said, take care of them horses, boy, take care of the cow, boy. Now, once cowboy gets to be a glamorized term, we don't get to play cowboys no more.
Wow.
That doesn't mean we weren't cowboys. You know what I mean? There was, Bass. There was Isom Dart. There was Stagecoach Mary. There was a whole lot of black folks who got out of the South said, hell no, we're getting out of this South. That makes sense. You had white folks going across the desert in covered wagons. You had black folks walking across with canvas wrapped around their feet, surviving and becoming Black Seminoles because sometimes the Native Americans understood us more. They were like, yo, you're original people too. Come roll with us, depending on the tribe, depending on the dynamic. So we have a tendency to, I think, not always appreciate our own history. When I made Posse, there were a lot of black folks who did not know we were in the West. But if you've been told long enough that, that you're not a part of something and not represented it, you'll start to push back from it and even resent it. And when I did Posse, they were like, oh, and then at the end, that's why I showed at the end of Posse all the real historical footage of black folks in the West. But that's a case of a lost history. A lot of us don't know. They said, well, why didn't you just make it? Dude, we did make it. We had Black Wall Street. Y'all burned it down.
Right.
Well, why didn't you just own land? We did try to own land. You had the grandfather clause that wouldn't let people vote or own land. Well, why don't you try to do this? Because we couldn't get a loan because it was redlined. Do you know what I mean? So why don't you just stand up and why don't you let them eat cake? Bitch, because we don't even have bread. You know what I'm saying? So there's a tendency to go, to not value that which we create. And I think that speaks to when you've been told you're 3/5 of a human being for 250 years, you don't value your contribution. You're not allowed to be a black father. A black father could have no place in slavery, right? Because the master made all the decisions about where your offspring went. They kept the mom around. They need her to nurse the baby, take care of it. But the father is selling them off here so that we couldn't even rehearse being black fathers. And suddenly you're free. What's black fatherhood? So to have a lineage like mine where, my dad knows his dad and I know my dad and my kids know me. And, we've had a strong black father. That's a fairly recent thing in America. We have not always valued ourselves. And so we evaluate by the latest and the greatest and the most media. And that was my father's point, is that we are in that way the true Americans, because we've let go of all that. And we're just so willing to adopt culture as given to us, or spoon fed to us. And of course, Paul Robeson asked the question, which is very poignant, which is when you buy into the zeitgeist, the paradigm, the values of a people who would buy and sell you as people, what do you become?
Wow. Mario, we need to have more conversations. This is what happens when we don't talk between every 10 to 15, 20 years. These conversations are longer, but bro, I appreciate you, man. And, Story of a 3-Day Pass is going to, I guess, be back in theaters in New York and LA tomorrow. So I'm really excited for people to get an opportunity to check it out. And to also love on Melvin Van Peebles, man, because I think he is so, so significant to the culture and people need to know that.
Yeah, brother. Thank you so much, man, for having me on.
Man, thank you, brother.
All right, man. Talk to you later.
Man.